All right, I'm Amy Kaiser. I'm from the Jackson District Library, Henrietta and Grass Lake branches, and we're so excited to be able to welcome Patrice Johnson, author of The Fall and Rise of Tyler Johnson. Or did I flip that?
No, you're right.
Okay, I always have to resist the urge because usually you say rise and fall, which is why I like it even better that it's flipped. And so we're going to be talking to her tonight about the process. Thank you. Yeah, she's Mary Jo is clapping for you. Um, we're going to be talking about your writing process and about your book itself, and hopefully maybe some hints about the next book you're working on. So Patrice grew up in Stockbridge and is currently editor-in-chief of the Stockbridge Community News. Prior to writing The Fall and Rise of Tyler Johnson, she studied thriller and nonfiction writing for 3 years with best-selling authors Bonnie Hearn Hill, writer of The Intern, If Anything Should Happen, and so on, and Mark Spencer, writer of Ghost Walking, and etc. She graduated summa cum laude from Alma College and holds a master's degree in English literature from MSU. Prior to becoming an author, Patrice founded 3 successful technology companies, served as VP of Marketing and Communications with a Fortune 100 company, and was a columnist for the industry's largest trade publication. She and husband Jim live on their 80-acre farm in Stockbridge. So thank you again so much for joining us, Patrice.
My,
And I will go ahead and start allowing people to talk. So if anybody has any initial questions, please go ahead and raise their hand. If not, I do have a bunch of questions for you because I love getting the chance to find about an author's writing process. So let's see if any of our attendees raise their hands first. All right, I'm not seeing anything yet. Woohoo, then that means I get to go. Okay. So Patrice, for many people, writing and publishing a book is an unfulfilled dream. And to start off, I kind of want to get an idea of what your writing process is like and what early experiences with the written word most influenced you. So my first question is, what do you think makes a good story?
well, this isn't me inventing this. They say, the experts say, anyway, that what makes a good story is something that makes the reader feel and that they can relate to, and I've heard too, if you can laugh and cry while reading a story, then that's a good story. Something that sticks with you and that becomes part of you thereafter. That would be a truly great story.
I think that's a very fair statement. Yeah, absolutely. And does anybody else have any comments they want to add to that?
I'm sorry, I can't remember. Are you okay with us unmuting ourselves or
Yes,
did you
go
want to call
ahead.
on us?
Go ahead. I'm going to click that everybody is allowed to talk and just wait your turn. And if nobody's talking and you have a question, go for it.
I think that's a great description of what makes a good story. I love any book or any movie I can watch that has parts of it that have me laughing and parts of it that have me crying. So I think you hit the nail on the head, Patrice.
Well, being able to identify a story and being able to write one are two different things. So it's something to aspire to. That's for sure. I should add that Mary Jo and I work together. She is really the co-editor in chief of the Stockbridge Community News. So she does a great job, and she's been one of the first readers on my second book here. So thank you, Mary Jo.
I actually read your Patrice's first book, and I can say there were parts that made me laugh and parts that made me cry. Now that I think about it, I didn't think about it till now, but I know they did.
Aw.
Congratulations, then. She's confirmed that it's a good story by your own standards.
Well, thank you.
Okay. So the next question that I'm kind of curious about is, what was an early experience in your life where you learned that language had power?
Yeah, was thinking about that, and I think that goes back so far that my parents always read to me. And the first book I can remember is Heidi. And I think I really related to it because I was a little girl with a goat and I lived out in the country and my bedroom was very cold. And my neighbor friend was a boy that I just hung out with, you know, all the time. So I very much related to Heidi. And I don't suppose it was because of Heidi that I didn't comb my hair, but that I'll say it was Heidi's fault.
Patrice.
So I would say an early exposure to Heidi, and then my folks always read to us every night before we went to bed. Somebody read something, and Old Yeller was really big. I think I've read that book 5 times, and I don't know why exactly it gets me so much, but that book, if that's my go-to. If I want to read something that takes me just off into another land, that's Old Yeller. And then because I was a horse fan, I read everything to do with horses. And I think, well, I read all the Walter Farley books. I think My Friend Flicka is a highly underrated book. But I'm sorry, I'm wandering on here. Go ahead, Amy. Do you have other questions? Or Mary Jo, did you have a question?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay.
Feel free to meander. I mean, that's the beauty of a conversation as opposed to like a strict interview. So if it takes you somewhere, I'm willing to go on that ride with you. So I find this an interesting question. Does writing energize you or does it exhaust you?
Both. If
Oh,
I have a good experience that day, then I'm very energized. If it's a frustrating experience, then I'm tired by it. I would say that when I get frustrated with something, my technique is not to go like watch TV or to talk with anybody. It's to something that is going to allow me to clear my mind, and then my mind will fix it. My mind will find the solution. So jazz music, bike rides, swimming, walking, anything that doesn't involve distracting me mentally will let the solution find its way up. And sometimes it's going to bed and waking up with the solution, or waking up in the middle of the night with a solution and writing it down, or waking up with a solution in the middle of the night and going and doing it. So
does that happen often, waking up in the middle of the night and at least having to write it down or go and do it?
yes, I used to keep a notepad by my bed, and now I just get up and do it. So, but I get up very early. I get up by 4 every morning. So when I get up early, that's 2 or 3 in the morning. And that's when I know that, you know, that I've gotten up early.
And I'm keeping an eye on Q&A and the attendees. So if anybody has a question, raise your hand, but I'm just going to keep on going with mine
Amy?
because I'm curious. Yes, go
Amy,
ahead.
there is a question in chat. I just wanted to
Oh,
let
there
you know.
is? Oh, it wasn't showing up in chat. Okay. Okay. Beth says, so excited to hear you are working on a second book. Is it as deeply personal as your first?
Oh, hi, Beth. Yeah, actually it is. The first book dealt with Tyler's first 4 years as a fugitive. The next book deals with his last 2 years. And of course, it's deeply personal because it's Tyler, my son, but this is the closure to it, so to his life, because he does die in the end. It's not a cliffhanger. So I changed the format on it in that it's still nonfiction, and I have more quotes in there from him, but I inserted an FBI agent. So it's a little bit more along the lines of what you might have the fugitive in as well as Into the Wild kind of a thing. But Tyler wrote an awful lot, and towards the last 2 years, he had a lot of different experiences. So there's really no overlap between the first book and the second, other than what they call the inciting incident, which is when he got in trouble. But yeah, I have finished it to the point now where some folks are reading it, and I'm 50 pages into my fourth edit of it, and then I'll be able to send it out to hopefully to agents and see if anybody will pick it up. Otherwise, I'll self-publish it.
Congratulations on your progress. I mean, that's pretty exciting to be done and on a fourth edit already. Awesome.
Thank you.
So I just want to make sure that I'm not missing anybody. Okay, good. So what is your writing kryptonite?
Oh, I think I can't write when there are people talking around me. I just start listening or participating, or somehow what they've said is what I type. So I don't have to have it absolutely silent, but it can be a conversation around me, like having the TV on, or having two people in another room talking. Music is great, jazz is great, anything instrumental. But if there's something with lyrics, nope, not gonna work for me. So those would be my language is a kryptonite, I guess. Dialogue, conversation.
No, I totally get you on that one. I'm that way about sleeping. If there's I can listen to music or white noise, but if I hear words, I'll wake up and listen. So
yeah. So I don't know how people go to a coffee shop and write. I can do that if I have my ear pods in and turn on music, and then I'm listening to jazz and ignoring the conversations around me. But I couldn't do it without something blocking those conversations.
okay. What would you say is your interesting writing quirk?
Well, I mentioned earlier to Amy that she had asked me about that, and I couldn't think of anything. And then I realized I have to have something to drink next to me. It doesn't matter. I mean, coffee or water. If I don't, I can't write. I have to solve that, because immediately, if I think I don't have something to drink, I feel parched, and I can't write. I can't do anything except think about how I've got to get something to drink, even if I don't drink it. But I think maybe what that's about, though, is my reaching over and picking up that cup and taking a little sip is my little tiny break, and it gives my brain a sense, a way of pulling back and maybe working through something, or the right verb, or finding the right descriptor, some transition or whatever. So it's not very exciting, but that's what it is. I have to have something to drink. Non-alcohol.
I was just gonna say, like water or tea, right?
For writing, for conversation, then the wine and the whatever.
You might have already touched on my next question, because you said My Friend Flicka was an underappreciated book. What is your favorite underappreciated book?
Oh, recently I read one, and actually I don't know if it's underappreciated because it won a Pulitzer Prize, but it's the author, Doer, Doer. It's
all
the
all
things
the
you
light
see, or
all the light we cannot see. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good
he
one.
has such a command of the language. He uses nouns as verbs, and it grabs you and pulls you right in. It's just a fabulous writer. I think different writers affect everybody differently, but I thought that was and it's one of those World War II novels, and I think there are a lot of those. I don't think I'd pick up anymore for a while because there's just been a lot of them. But I think of all the people that have dealt with those topics, he did a fabulous job. His writing is just amazing to me.
It was really good. So actually, though, that does bring me to a topic related to that book, and I'm curious what your thoughts are. Um, how do you feel about the device of jumping back and forth between two characters, like in that story, as opposed to like sticking kind of with one until that's kind of resolved and then moving over? Because there was a lot of jump cutting between each character's experience.
Well, that's a good question because I have been doing that in this book that I'm working now. And then I also tried to mess around with moving timelines, and it got to be too much. It got to be so that, I mean, I could follow it, of course, but nobody else would. So I think it can add a lot of, an element of interest, like Barbara Kingsolver, when she writes from the different perspective of a little girl versus the mother versus, I think it's fabulous. But the author has to stay in the point of view of that character for that scene. And if they pop out of it, it disturbs me. I don't like them. I don't like, if they're from that perspective, they need to stay in that perspective. I have a cat here. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. If I was doing this from home, I would be too. Okay, let's see. I think you may have already addressed this because you were talking about some of your favorite. What is your all-time favorite children's book?
All-time favorite children's book. Well, I guess if you want to get to a children's book, The Giving Tree, Sheldon Silverstein.
Shel Silverstein, yeah, classic.
Because it was a great book when I was, reading it as a kid. But then when I read as an adult, I cried. Look, as a kid, you don't see the sadness of that tree. As an adult, you do. So I just think that's a great thing that you can see. It can show a totally different perspective based on where you are when you're reading the book. But
that is an excellent point.
Sheldon Silverstein is pretty great.
Yeah. Let's see. So what books or authors have most influenced your writing?
Well, I think anybody that pretty much anybody would say Hemingway, because Hemingway, although I don't like reading about war necessarily, he has a way of compressing a thought. He doesn't waste any words, and he drives his point home. And I think efficient writing like that is very important because readers these days don't have any patience for extra words. They don't want their time wasted. So I think that's a real good influencer. You had mentioned that to me before, so I'm going to, I thought of another person too. Oh, Elmore Leonard, in terms of dialogue. He really mastered how to do dialogue, I think. And then I personally like John Hart very much because he really knows the craft of constructing a scene and staying organized and on point with that scene and staying in point of view, developing the setting so you feel like you're there with him. So I think different authors bring different things to the table. But if I were to model after somebody, it would be John Hart. And I like John Grisham because he breaks the rules and he does a fabulous job, but he's not supposed to. Those are breaking a lot of rules, and it's just it's not right. I'm kidding. But
not fair, right? You follow the rules, and no.
So if you talk to the people that that are very into the structure of a novel, they will poo-poo John Grisham. But you can't argue with success. No. So I think it's quite amazing. And I think there are books on writing that say, substance, form follows substance, or something to that effect.
Amy, could I jump in with a question kind of related to what Patrice was talking about? So Patrice, talking about the different elements that make a good story, you have conversation, you have description, all that kind of thing. What are you most comfortable? I know, I read your first book and I'm reading your second book, pre-reading, and you have elements of both, plus you have, Tyler's diaries and that kind of thing. So I'm just wondering, what are you most comfortable with when you're writing? Just a mix? Are you comfortable with all of that? Or are you I know myself, I'm most comfortable writing conversation, and I have trouble forcing myself to get description of this, setting the scene and that kind of thing in there. What about you?
Well, I think all of it's work, but I think it needs a balance, because if you have too much conversation, dialogue tends to speed up the reading, and readers like that really well. But you can't zip through the whole thing. You have to have transitions, and you have to have what's going on in people's minds a little bit. You can only reveal so much about a person through dialogue, depending on whether you're in, you know, second person narrative or third person narrative or first person. But I think that in this case, the one I'm working on now, it's been very helpful to have another character to shed light on the pursuit of Tyler. And that sheds light on Tyler that I couldn't do through Tyler's eyes. I can shed light on Tyler through this other person's eyes. So having description and having other characters can talk, other characters can, you know, think, their actions, all those are ways of rounding out a character to kind of make make everything more real. So I don't know if that's a real good answer, but I think writing dialogue is a real art, and that's what is generally the hardest for people. But description, for example, I can't remember who wrote it, but when you're describing a person, for example, when they walk in the room, you should have 3 points that you point up about them. Not 4, not 5, and not 2. Should be 3 points, because that's what the reader expects. And you can't do that so well through dialogue. You have to do that a little bit through description. So I just think they all have their place.
I've
That's
never
really
heard that.
interesting. Yeah, I was going to say I've never heard that either. That's fascinating.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm learning something. If I actually had talent to write, I would be learning something and able to use this.
Well,
I'll
there's
leave
a
it to the more
caveat to
talented.
that. When you count the 3, I don't know how you count the 3. It feels like 3. If it feels like, it could be one sentence with 4 different items in it, and that would be counted as 1. I
Okay.
guess. So I think that's a pretty flexible rule.
Gotcha. So, my next question was kind of along with hers, that when she was talking about which part was the difficult. Um, so in the overall writing process, like, what do you find the most difficult part of it?
In the overall, I think getting started is the most difficult, because, well, like on the first book, I wrote a lot that I had to throw out. So, and there's a lot to be said for that too. I think you need to get stuff down and get it, because it is kind of like working with clay. You have to figure out what you're working with. But I think the whole getting started part is the hardest. And once you figure out, you know, what you want to do, where you want to go with it, then that pulls you into it. But being off in the netherworld where you don't really know what you're going to be, where, like, for example, you could take a point of view where you're telling a story in first person, or you could tell the story in third person, or you could take it in some type of limited narrator. And the only way to really know which one it should be is to try it each way and to see which one fits that book that's in your head. So that can be that can be a stumbling block, because you're writing maybe in the wrong person, and it needs to switch. And something in the back of your mind is telling you that, so you're not feeling good about it through the whole time. And I'm saying that from experience, because I struggled a lot with the genre for the Fall and Rise, until I had because I was going to do it as a memoir. And then I had an instructor say, well, this can't be a memoir. Memoir has to be written about yourself. Right. So then I was going to do it as a biography, and it doesn't really fit a biography. And so I had an instructor say, no, this needs to be narrative nonfiction. This is what this needs to be. And so that solved the genre part. So I think there are little pieces you need to take and put together. And once you know the pieces, then you've got the train on the tracks, and you can start moving forward. Other than that, you're kind of grasping at things and figuring out how to get started. And that for me is the hardest, getting started.
So are you saying getting started in terms of the whole book, or getting started maybe at a new chapter or something? I mean, is it at that level even, or just getting started with the book?
Well, getting started with a book is the hardest, but then there are, it happens with every new chapter, because once you're in a chapter, you're in it. And then when that's over, you have to start again. So it's
Yeah.
another restarting issue. So that's a very good question, Mary Jo. It's not on the scale of starting a book, but it's a mini hurdle, because the tendency is to find something else to do before you start that chapter.
Yeah.
Especially if it's troublesome one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, in my case, it was a little different, because I felt driven to write Tyler's story. Since he couldn't live his life, I felt that, he had a lot to say. So I like, there were several times I tried not to write this book, but it just kept coming to me and getting me up in the night. So I just had to keep going at it. So I think a lot of it has to do with how motivated you are to do something too.
So what was one of the most surprising things you learned in creating your own books?
I think one of the things that surprised me is that when, for example, getting back to dialogue, I've noticed now when somebody talks, I listen to what they're saying, but I'm also watching their gestures, and I'm watching what they're doing with their eyes and where they're moving their shoulders. And then what I realized is that we all share a lot of common ground. And in a certain situation, most people will react a certain way. And if you have a character that does the wrong thing with their hands at a certain moment, then that character loses credibility. And of course, you lose the reader. So I think I learned that there's a lot more, people are a lot more predictable than we might think. And there are rules, dude. In the sense that if you have a character, if you instinctively want to write that your character did something, and that character is not supposed to do that thing right there, that's going to keep coming back at you until you fix that. It's not something, if you do a good job of developing your character, you're not really allowed to break the rules of that character unless that character gives you permission, like if there's some reason for it. Because if you've done a good job creating them, they are true to who they are. I think it's the thing, it's when a character will ring true to themselves. And you can really mess that up as an author when you try to force them into a box that character doesn't belong in, unless you've created the background to migrate them into that. I don't know if that makes any sense or not. I learned that.
No, it does. That's
Yeah.
your answers so far have been just really interesting and insightful. And so, yeah, you bring up some really interesting points. I'm sorry. I'm just like, over here nodding my head. But yeah, that's really interesting about, I mean, the way you talk about characters. I mean, yours is narrative nonfiction, but just kind of almost like in general, that that they have that they're as much a person as you are almost, and that they have um things that's true to them. And that was really interesting to me.
I can give you an example. I just wrote a character that he's one of Tyler's professors,
Mhm.
and I researched him on his webpage, and he's a very peculiar person. I mean, he does really actually have on his website rules for, if you invite me to dinner, what I can eat. And so he was a particularly interesting character. Well, I had him say something about Tyler in talking to the FBI agent, I had him tell the FBI agent that Tyler had a Midwestern accent. And that professor would not notice that. That professor might notice what Tyler was eating, but he wouldn't notice his accent. So I couldn't get away with sticking that in there. I wanted the audience to know that about Tyler, but I couldn't get it from that professor because it
Right.
didn't fit him.
Plus,
So that-
everyone knows people in the Midwest don't have an accent.
That's right. We talk right. That's how we talk.
Right, we talk right. We don't got a stinking accent.
Beth from Arizona is probably shaking her head, right?
Beth grew up in the Midwest.
Okay, so she's one of us. She knows how to talk right.
That's right, Beth.
So it looks like Diana was able to join us too, and Diana, you met Patrice because she works at the
Oh.
Henrietta Library, and so yep, Beth's like, I'm still a Michigander at heart. So for those of you who may have joined after we started, I will go ahead and allow you to talk, and we've just been if you have something that you want to ask Patrice, feel free to jump in and ask her. I've been going through some questions that myself and Diana also helped put together. So, and we're getting kind of towards the near of getting to know the writing process, and we're about to get into the book itself. So that's exciting. Um, my last question for you, kind of about just being a writer, is that, and Diana brought this up, that writing is a talent that seems to run in your family. Can you elaborate on that for us?
Well, Mom was a writer. I mean, and she just always encouraged us to write. I think, well, I can remember when I was really little trying to tell her something, and she'd say, you know what, you should write that in a book. So it was like, you'll need to go to college. Same type of thing. They got imprinted in my head, I guess. you got imprinted in there at a very early age, but I don't think that's an advantage necessarily. I think anybody that wants to write can write. It's just a matter of practice, to tell you the truth.
Patrice?
Yes.
I'm sorry, you guys. If I'm jumping in too often, please just tell me to be quiet.
Not at all. This is great. Keep going.
So knowing your two books, and you know that they're obviously, you know, you're writing about someone who was so close to you, your son. Do you perceive that after this book, like if there's not another Tyler book, do you perceive that you would want to pursue writing another book? And would it have to be the type of book that it would have to be about something or someone that you knew personally? Someone or some situation that you were a part of? Or would you be able to do outright fiction?
Oh, that's a good question. Actually, I think fiction would be a lot easier because you can just make it do what you want it to do. You know, you can with nonfiction, it's got to adhere to the facts. But I would like to write another book, and I've got another book in my head. It's not a personal book, but I think it would be more on the nonfiction line, just because I like this format of trying to do superimpose a thriller type of novel style onto a nonfiction type of book. I think it makes it go very nicely. And I think that anything you did, whether it was fiction or nonfiction, would have to have certain elements to it. Like you'd have to have conflict and conflict resolution, and you'd have to have character development stuff. So I think my heart leans towards nonfiction just because it seems like it's more valuable. Instead of making something up in my head, dealing with facts would be interesting.
And that does kind of match, kind of in a way, what you do. I mean, with you now being the editor of the Stockbridge Community News, because in a way, writing a news article is that you're taking a nonfiction topic, something that's true, but you're weaving it and framing it in such a way to make it engaging and entertaining for your audience as well. So yeah,
That's true.
that seems kind of similar to me now that you say it like that.
Well, actually, I think that I don't have a background in journalism, but we're getting a background through this paper. But I think when you start off a scene with a who, what, where, when, and why, you are doing the same thing you would do in a newspaper article. And it's important because you're setting the place and the problem and the main character and the time. You're bringing your reader to a certain point in time, facing a certain issue or in a certain objective. And so that that fits very well. And that would be in fiction or nonfiction. The same type of rule would apply in structuring a scene.
Thank you.
All right. So does anybody have any more questions or anything that they want to comment? Oh, I see Diana has her hand raised. Diana, I have you unmuted. Are you able to speak, or do you need me to, or do you need to type in your question and have me read it? Do you have a microphone?
No.
I hear you. I
I
hear you,
you
Diana.
growling, Diana.
Oh no. Oh, and now she's gone. Uh-oh. Well, when she comes back, I'll keep an eye out for her, and we'll get her question for Diana. Okay. So, and I know that Mary Jo has also read your book. Mary Jo, do you have any questions about her first book, the Fall and Rise of Tyler, that you want to ask before I start in on
No,
my
I
question?
think I did want to make a comment because from the chat, it looks like Beth wrote that she's excited to hear what you said earlier. She's excited to hear that Patrice is working on a second book. And I just wanted to chime in and say, I thought it was interesting, Beth, because having read the first book, and even though Patrice says she's concentrating on the last 2 years in the second book, which the first book did not do, helping with some edits in her second book, I'm happy to say she's done a really nice job of providing enough background, just, not boring you to tears with a bunch of background at the beginning of a chapter or anything like that. She weaves it in through the story, but she's able to pull some good background in that I think would, if you didn't read the first book, you want to be able to jump into the second book, without absolutely requiring someone to read the first book. So I think Patrice, you're going to be pretty successful. You're doing it very successfully thus far, as far as I've read anyway. So I wanted to tell that to Amy or Beth, even though Beth sounds like might have read the first book, so she would probably be very poised to read the second book.
Well, thank you. That's very good to know, because that was one of the things I really wrestled with, was how to do the second sequel and make it self-standing. It was a challenge.
That's a hard balance. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and start with my questions. I'm gonna again try and keep an eye out to see if anybody raises their hand, or you all should be unmuted. So feel free to chime in whenever you want. So what made you ultimately decide to write about Tyler's experience?
Well, when we got the call that he had died, we went to France to identify his remains, and his friends took us around to places he'd stayed. And there was a cabin out in the mountains, and I was climbing around up in the attic, and I found a box of his journals. And so as I started reading them, I thought, well, this just needs to be, it just needs to be brought to life. It needs to be made public. So that's where that started. I had actually, when Tyler first went missing, and that was probably for therapy, I suppose, I got all of his stuff and lined it all up. And then I took classes on how to write a thriller. And I did write a first book. But just as I had finished it, we found out the truth, because I had him completely someplace else, and it was fictitious based on, the pieces that I could piece together. But so I just wanted this to be as close to reality as possible. So it just seemed like it needed, I don't know, it just needed to be done, and I was the one to do it. So there we are.
I think it is a story that needs to be told. And I'm just going to check. I see Diana is back. And Diana, I unmuted you. Did you want to try and ask your question again?
Oh my goodness, I'm having serious internet issues.
I'm sorry. Well, I can hear you right now, so that's a good sign.
Okay, good. Hi, Patrice. I'm so glad we got to do this. I just wish it was in person. I really, really wish it was in person, considering my computer.
Maybe book
And
two.
our internet out here in the boonies. But
Nice
yeah,
to
I
see you
wanted
again.
to know your second book that you've written or are writing. Is it complete? Can we get a name of a title? Did I already miss that?
Oh, it's not complete. It's right now in the final editing stages, and I think I'm going to be calling it Tyler's Ledge.
Ooh, I am really anticipating that with a bated breath.
Oh,
I want to read more. I want to read more of whatever you've got. I've already devoured the community news, so you know.
oh. Well, thank Mary Jo for that too. I mean, woo.
Oh yes.
Yeah, Diana is such a
Oh,
champion of your book whenever people come into our library. She and
oh,
Kathy both.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
yeah, you're a local celebrity. You really are. And what a way to get that kind of status. I mean, it's so tragic. I guess that's what I really want people to understand because things can happen to any of us at any given time. You know, we all make mistakes, and that's the part I want them to understand, especially younger people. I want younger people to get interested in this book because they're at that point in their life where they're making those decisions and you know.
Well, Diana, I think you hit on the heart of the book and the heart of what, if Tyler were alive, what he would want to convey. And that is for young people to think, because an impulsive act can have irreversible consequences. And that's almost inconceivable to a young person, but it's true and it does happen. And I think I do get emails from students that have read the book and they've said, oh, I just wish Tyler could be here to help me with my math, or I've done things that I never got caught and I'm just so lucky, but we all have things we look at and think, wow, I was lucky. And in this case, he wasn't lucky, but I think that's a very important message to young people because they don't tend to be thinking about the consequences of their actions all the time.
That's the truth right there. It's so hard to see past now.
Mhm.
And I know from previous experience how many young people have gotten themselves into a situation where they didn't take Tyler's path. They instead ended up being locked up in prison and regretting every single moment, and having to mature in that kind of environment is a rough way to go. So I do not blame him for doing what he did, because at least he had some freedom for a while and adventures and hardship too, but I don't know.
Well, I think people grow up one way or another, and those poor souls that grow up in prison have a different row to hoe, and he had a different
Right.
road. We all have a different road that we travel, but it would be good if young people could avoid some of those hardships that they self-inflict just by making a stupid impulsive act. But that's easier said in hindsight than
Yeah, it
I'm
is.
not one of those people that was it's a miracle I'm alive, I'll tell you that. So,
Well,
we
I
are.
know what you're saying. I think we all have had those moments at some point.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Hey, do you or can you say, have you ever heard from Yuki, or do you know how she's doing?
I did originally. She's the one that managed to get me a lot of his journals that were on his computer, but I don't know where she is now. I did just recently, and this will be in the new book, I got Freedom of Information Act information sent to me after 3 years. And it said that they actually closed the case when Tyler died. They opened it again and then closed it after he died. So I don't think they're looking for her now, which would be good for her to know, because last I knew she was still in hiding.
That's so sad. I would hope that she would somehow get word or understand that she was free to return and I don't know, try to have a regular old boring life like everybody else, you know.
Simple things like when you're a fugitive, there's no safety net. So like what happens when you become 70 years old and you have no social security and can't apply for it, or no medical insurance, you know? I mean, practical things that would be
Right.
good for her to have. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh. So Mary Jo is also like a writer for the paper, correct?
Yes, Mary Jo's fabulous.
Oh, stop, Patrice.
It's true.
And
Yes,
humble.
Diane.
So, like with hindsight, is 2020. Do you ever think about, or do you have an idea? What do you think would happen if Tyler had in the beginning chosen to come forward? Like, what kind of sentence do you think he would have got as a first-time offender? Again, keeping in mind that it was shortly after 9/11, everybody was on high alert with the idea of terrorism and so on.
Well, there were mandatory minimum sentences. So I think it was realistic that he could have faced 35 years in prison.
Wow.
But
Wow.
the person that I call Danny in the book is Billy Cottrell, and he was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and was released after 6. But I did find in the arrest affidavit, I found just as a note by the FBI agent that after Billy had requested to see an attorney on the way to the elevators, he told the FBI agent that he made all the Molotov cocktails. So I think in hindsight, if a good lawyer had seen that, he would have said, well, Tyler may have been there and he may have been an accessory, but he probably wasn't he probably didn't lead the conspiracy kind of thing. So, but who knows? Things were very hyper aware back in 2003 and 2004.
And
You're right as far as I'm sorry.
no, you're good. You're good. Go for it.
I forget if I start talking that I'm new to this. So if I start talking, I'm interrupting, but you're used to that. Oops, and now my phone's ringing.
I got your back, Diana. I'll mute you, and then you can unmute yourself when the phone's done. So I guess my next question, and I debated about it even whether to ask this because it's such a personal book. What was the hardest scene or part of the book to write?
I was thinking they were all difficult, except the happy ones, of course. But there was a scene in there where they have this dog has adopted them, Jean Dorgong, or however you pronounce it, and they're having to leave him. Was very hard. And I could see it was very hard on Tyler, the way he wrote about it. He tried not to show a lot of emotion, but I know it was very hard. That was a hard thing to write too. And then when they were back looking for him to try to get him back. So that whole part there was hard.
Is that the dog in the first book, Patrice, or the second?
The first book. Yeah.
Okay.
Was there, you'd mentioned when you were talking about getting started that you write a whole lot more than you initially use because you're just kind of getting it all together and organizing it. Was there anything that you had to edit out of the book that just killed you? And you're just like, oh, I wish I could have made it work, or I wish I had the space to leave it in, but for pacing or whatever, you had to take it out.
Yes, there was a scene where actually Tyler and Yuki had made friends with this woman that I think she might have been homeless too, because she lived in her van with about I don't know, 5 dogs, or a bunch of dogs anyway. And they knew all the dogs. They were all like family to them. And there was a big, big dog that Tyler took for a run with him. And the dog got hit by a train. And it devastated her. It devastated Tyler. It was I thought it was, it was a very dramatic scene, but it didn't move the plot line forward. And so it had to go. But it was a very gripping, because as he's trying to help the woman that is, I mean, she's drinking Listerine. She's so desperate when she's done drinking all of her wine. She's drinking her mouthwash of some sort. And he buries the dog because she can't. And he just feels terrible about it, of course, but it wasn't his fault that the dog chased trains. He shouldn't be chasing trains. He shouldn't kiss a train. but anyway, that was I thought that was a good one. I liked that scene. I hated to cut it, but I couldn't justify keeping it in when the book was kind of too long anyway. So.
Gotcha. Okay. Let's see. Can you tell us more about the Longmont Longmont Community Justice Partnership?
Yeah, it's a very interesting program where the I guess you'd call it social services group kind of works with the police. And when kids get in trouble, if they're not, I think it might be first time offenders, but it might be second time. I don't know. Anyway, kids that with a little bit of help can get straightened out. And so they work with the parents and with the person that's been the victim. And they basically counsel them so that they all get together and they explain to that young person how they were hurt, by this act of whatever it is. And they have like a 90% success rate where these kids do not become career criminals or repeat offenders.
Wow, that's
There's
amazing.
almost no recidivism. So I think it's a wonderful program. Yeah. And it shows kids that if you make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. You can make amends. There are things you can do to make it better. You can't just walk away. You have to do things to make it better, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. It's not the end of your life. So it's a good program.
Sounds amazing. That's
Yeah.
90%. That's good.
Yeah.
I hope Diana heard that, because that's amazing, given her background.
I think it's 90%. It's very
Amy? Oh,
Yes?
I'm sorry, this is on a different topic. So if you were going to stay on the same
Nope,
topic.
go ahead. We're good.
Okay, I wanted to ask this actually before you asked about that. So I'm sorry if I'm veering us off.
No,
But
you're fine. I'm sorry.
one thing that struck me in the first book, I'm not seeing it mentioned as much in the second book, but I'm sure it was the situation. In the first book, what I couldn't get over, especially because I get it that it was after 9/11 here and everybody was hyper aware here, and there was a lot going on in terms of people's freedoms here, that people were willing to sort of give up some things that in the past they would have been up in arms about, if, like cameras at intersections and things like that. But what surprised me in the first book, Patrice, is how difficult it sounds like, and being in Europe and on Corsica, sorry, I have an alarm going off, how difficult it was for them to be able to work without papers. It's like, I really wouldn't have believed it was so difficult to go in and get a dishwashing job, but it sounds like it was really that difficult to go in without papers on Corsica to get a dishwashing job.
Yeah, very difficult. And then you couldn't get an apartment. You could, unless you had documentation that showed you had a job.
Yeah,
so
all of that really surprised me, I guess.
Yeah. Apparently the law enforcement must be very strict that if they have illegal undocumented workers working for them, they're subject to very serious penalties, I guess. But yeah, I think
that's how it came across.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it makes me wonder, is it because they have more socialist type benefits and things like that they make people adhere to these rules? I have no idea, but I just was astounded that it was so difficult?
Well, that's a good question. I know that when Tyler died and we were trying to get him cremated and bring him back, it took us almost, well, with the actual lawyer's name is Stefan. When Stefan actually worked through the process, and it took a full 8 months before we could do that. France has a very has a huge bureaucracy.
Right.
And I think it reaches into every level.
Amazing.
Mhm. Every country's different, but I think the French like their bureaucracies, or well, the
I thought
bureaucrats.
you were going to say they like their beer.
They like their wine, I think.
So, and in our talks, we've talked about the fact that Tyler's story is being turned into a film. And I was wondering how, for our audience, how much involvement have you had in the process? And do you know when it's coming out?
Oh, well, there actually are two potential films. One is a documentary, and that is complete. I sent them photos, and because the book is under contract, I couldn't send journals, but I could send them photos. So that they came over here and interviewed me and interviewed Kelsey, and they flew a drone around the property and filmed it and that type of thing. But then COVID hit, so I don't know if it's been released or not. I don't think it has, but I think it's completed. I think because they've sent me a copy for viewing. The other one is I guess you'd call it a feature film that I have signed an film option rights for both books, and he's a film producer in Paris, France. He used to be with Studio Canal, and he seems quite determined because he renewed his option after it expired. So he's waiting for the next book.
Were you happy with the documentary film that you got to see? Do you felt like it was an accurate portrayal?
Yeah, I thought, I mean, from a technical point of view, I would have done things a little differently. Like, I didn't think they established the storyline or the problem enough at the beginning. But yeah, I think the Chris Brannon is the person who did it. And I think he worked very hard at it and was very conscientious. He went to Corsica 2 or 3 times and interviewed people and filmed the landscape there. And he spent a lot of time looking for Tyler's treehouse and never found it. He asked me, he said that he told me he'd been looking for it. And I said, well, you know, Tyler built that not to be found. So somebody someday will stumble across it, but probably not somebody who's looking for it.
Right. So does anybody else have any questions about the books? Anything that you guys have been dying to know? No? Okay. Well, we've talked a little bit about, because I was going to have the next part be about your next book, and you kind of shared with us that you're on your 4th edit, and that you're looking around to see who will publish it and are prepared to self-publish if need be. So my question, kind of in keeping with that, is how did going through the publishing process of your first book change how you write and affect this publishing process for your second book?
Oh, well, I learned an awful lot. After I had written the first book, my daughter and I went out to a New York Writers Conference, and we met with agents and stuff like that. And we learned a lot more about what they're looking for. You know, for example, in a query letter, a simple thing like, if you compare, for example, if I were to compare the book to The Fugitive and Into the Wild, both of those are older, and so they can't really call up on their computers the current sales on them. So when you reference your book, you need to reference it to a current book and then a classic if you want. But they have to have something where they can click in and check the sales numbers, which little things like that, I never would have thought of, never in a
Right,
million
right.
years. And then I did have one of the agents say, well, you know, you need an antagonist, a clear antagonist, which is something I knew, but I didn't do in the first book because I just couldn't see how I could possibly cover all an antagonist and what we're on in Tyler's journal. So, this next book, I do have a clear antagonist,
Okay.
things like that.
Yeah.
But I do, on that note, I think that if you're looking to get published by a big publishing company, you have to have an agent. They don't take individual submissions. I mean, you can send them, but they're not going to look at them. And so the next hardest thing is to find an agent. And that's very difficult. And you need an agent that has a relationship with the big companies. Because if they're not with the big companies, you can self-publish and reach the small companies just as well, just as easily. So it's a very interesting business, I think.
Okay. And then, we're getting kind of to the hour mark. I just wanted to ask, is there anything that you particularly want to make sure that we know about or share about your newest work, or anything else that any messages you want to get across? Here's your platform.
Oh. No, I guess not. Thank you very much for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm
I'm
flattered.
just so glad that you agreed. I was so bummed when we had to cancel our in-person one because of COVID. So thank you so much for your flexibility in doing this with us.
Oh, my pleasure. Get to be home.
Yeah. All right. Last chance before we shut this down. Was there anybody else who had any additional questions or anything that you want to say for Patrice? I see Diana has her hand up. All right, Diana, you're good to go. I'm sorry. I thought you'd been unmuted the whole time.
Hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay, I'm gonna try to talk really fast because this internet is not good. Patrice, would you be willing, if the time ever comes when we get an all clear, to do an in-person, maybe, I don't know, maybe by then your second book will be out. And we could do another one of these, but in person. Because I
Sure,
think
I'd love to. Sure.
very, very well attended. I know, did you end up doing one at Stockbridge Library?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, yeah, because I know some of the ladies there too. I thought you had. And
Yeah.
I feel like, this is wonderful, but I'm not one for technology. I'll be the first to say, and Amy will back me up on that.
No
Well, you're
comment.
fine.
Well, I'm really looking forward to reading the second book, seeing the films, and this has been really, as tragic as the whole situation is, I still have to say I was just totally fascinated with Tyler as an individual, because he just, I don't know, he just seemed so beyond your average college student, put it that way.
Well, I think he got himself into a situation where he had to grow a lot and change a lot. I think he was a
But
kid in college, just like anybody else, pretty much. But
yeah, but I mean his level of intelligence, and then just I don't know, the spirit that allowed him to survive in another country and do what he did. I mean, I don't think, most of us could really follow through. We might think about it, but I don't know. I think I'd cop out. I'd be afraid to go. And then I'd be sunk. But I was fascinated with that aspect of it, that he had the wherewithal to do that.
well, a couple of things on that. When he disappeared, we didn't know where he was, and we all, Kelsey and Jim and I just kept saying, well, Tyler's very resourceful. He's very resourceful. And he was. He was very optimistic. He was inherently just an optimistic person. And then Kelsey mentioned when she first learned that he had fled the country, she was with somebody at college at Penn State at the time, and they said, well, you know, they're going to catch him and arrest him. And she said, no, you don't know my brother. They'll never find him. And
Wow.
and I think that's just how he was. He knew technology thoroughly, and because of his physics background, and he just I don't know. It would have been a blessing probably if he had been apprehended, but it probably wasn't ever going to happen.
It
Well,
sounds like Kelsey knew her brother well.
Yes, she did. Yeah.
And like Diana, I'm in awe of Tyler and how much he knew and how he was able to do all that he did. But honestly, I am absolutely in awe that Tyler's mom could write this book, that could spend the hours and hours and hours it takes to be thinking about him all. I mean, it has to be an outlet in a way, and maybe a healthy outlet, but I don't know that I could do it. I don't know that I just don't know that I could see it through like you have, Patrice.
Well, I'm sure you could.
I don't think so.
In a lot of ways, it was selfish because I was spending time with Tyler.
Yeah, and that counts for a lot, I'm sure.
Well, you have a definite talent, and I think he would have been very, very pleased with the outcome of the book as far as how you wrote his story. And I don't know, I think you got a pretty special family going on there, and he's still involved.
Yeah.
Well, that's real nice of you. Thank you.
And that's kind of the beauty of the written word, is it goes on even when we don't.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Well, thank you again so much. Thank you everybody for joining us.
Yes, thanks for joining, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. It was nice talking with you all.
Likewise.
Okay.
Thanks for the invite.
Bye.